We're a nonprofit organization dedicated to eradicating human slavery, human trafficking, child exploitation, and child sexual abuse material through disrupting networks and applying data technology and advanced analytics and intelligence.
Hello, and welcome to the Anti-Human Trafficking Intelligence Initiative, or ATII, 2022 Annual Summit, Anti-Human Trafficking Cryptocurrency Consortium, Blockchain Forensic Collaboration. My name is Bill Callahan, and I will be the moderator of today's Blockchain Forensics panel. In an effort to combat human trafficking and the use of cryptocurrency to support and fund this terrible and deadly crime, 4 cryptocurrency and blockchain analytics companies, Chainalysis, TRM, CipherTrace, and Blockchain Intelligence Group have joined forces today to discuss the latest trends in the use of cryptocurrency and how the private sector has teamed up with non-government organizations such as ATII and law enforcement agencies to disrupt, dismantle, and destroy human trafficking organizations. Before I begin, I'd like to introduce the panel. Chris Januszewski is head of global investigations at blockchain intelligence company TRM, where he leads a team of investigative talent from former law enforcement and private sector organizations, including the U.S. Secret Service, FBI, Europol, Homeland Security Investigations, and Refinitiv. Prior to joining TRM, Chris spent 15 years at the Internal Revenue Service, where he was most recently an IRS criminal investigations special agent, leading some of the most notorious cryptocurrency-related criminal investigations, including Bitfinex hack and Welcome to Video takedown. He was instrumental in establishing an interagency cryptocurrency strike force with the Washington, D.C. United States Attorney's Office and briefed policymakers at the highest levels of government on cryptocurrency and cyber issues. Additionally, Chris and his team casework methodologies were cited extensively in DOJ's cryptocurrency enforcement framework. Chris is the recipient of the Secretary's Honor Award from the Secretary of the Treasury 2020, Chief Investigative Excellence from IRS Criminal Investigations in 2020, and the Meritorious Service Award from the Secretary of the Treasury in 2019. Janelle Still is an Air Force veteran and currently serves as CipherTrace's Director of Investigations, the Terrorism Financing SME, and is co-chair of the Defenders League, a pro bono investigation service. In her role, she has trained law enforcement, law firms, domestic and foreign government agencies, and financial crime specialists. She is also an adjunct professor in the Non-Proliferation and Terrorism Studies Department at the Middlebury Institute of International Studies. Elizabeth Beth Bisbee is currently U.S. Head of Investigations at Chainalysis, where she leads a team of best-in-class cryptocurrency investigators. Prior to that, she was an intelligence research specialist at the Drug Enforcement Administration, where she served as a nationally recognized subject matter expert on cryptocurrencies, tracing the flow of illicit funds in criminal cases and identifying transactional behavior occurring on the blockchain. As DEA's lead SME, Beth trained hundreds of agents, including yours truly, and analysts at DEA and other law enforcement agencies. She assisted in more than 400 investigations involving cryptocurrency, assisted in the seizure of cryptocurrency, and served as a witness, testifying witness. She has been researching cryptocurrencies and their illicit use and actively working cases in that area since 2014. And I am Bill Callahan, Director of Government and Strategic Affairs at Blockchain Intelligence Group. Prior to joining Blockchain Intelligence Group, I served in the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration, retiring as the Special Agent in charge of the St. Louis Division. During my tenure with the DEA, I managed the New York Division's Financial Investigations team and oversaw numerous financial investigations, some involving the use of cryptocurrencies for illicit purposes. In my current position, I am responsible to develop relationships with global law enforcement, military, and intelligence agencies in an effort to combat the use of cryptocurrency and digital assets for illegal and illicit purposes. Welcome to the webinar, panelists. Thanks for being here. As our panelists and audience are aware, human trafficking is the act of recruiting, transporting, transferring, harboring, or receiving of persons by means of threat, fraud, or use of force or other forms of coercion for the purposes of exploitation. Human trafficking is one of the fastest growing forms of crime in the world, primarily affecting women and girls and generating approximately $150 billion per year. Financial institutions play an important role in this by identifying and reporting suspicious indicators of human trafficking activity. Just like in other criminal activity for financial gain, such as drug trafficking, ransomware, and wildlife trafficking, criminals involved in human trafficking have turned to cryptocurrency to avoid the controls of traditional banking systems. These criminals exploit dark markets for sex trafficking and child pornography. Criminals engaged in human trafficking use cryptocurrencies to purchase advertisements, sell services, and even pay the victims. To get the conversation started today, I'd like to ask each of you to provide an example or two of either a pattern of behavior or an indicator of cryptocurrency being used in human trafficking or maybe other criminal activity in general. I'd like to start with you, Beth, since you've been around both on the government side, like all our panelists. Maybe you have one or two examples here you can share with us today.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you so much, Bill. So some of the things within human trafficking is that financial service providers are at the forefront of the fight against human trafficking, as their transaction monitoring abilities allow them to proactively spot the financial warning signs and notify authorities. However, relying on fiat currency-based institutions alone doesn't necessarily reduce the human trafficking and its related crimes is not sufficient. So cryptocurrency is a preferred payment option for web-based human trafficking adjacent services, which most revolve around sexual exploitation and exist on both the clear and dark net. One of the biggest challenges with human trafficking is that the blockchain only provides a snapshot of that criminal industry. So looking at one aspect of the investigation alone, so fiat versus crypto or real world versus web-based, a proper holistic view of the illicit transactions cannot necessarily be determined. So taking that into account, we do see a strong correlation between ClearNet sites like LeoList that advertise under like a personal's ad and collect payment through cryptocurrency. And the way that we see on the blockchain the payment actually being instilled is through Bitcoin ATM kiosks, like local coin ATM. So we have observed that the origination of funds stemming from Bitcoin kiosks as the on-ramp to sending payment to the online ad sites like LeoList. So oftentimes we see an indicator of human trafficking subjects making deposits of a low value, usually between anywhere from $50 to $300 at a Bitcoin ATM kiosk. And then just as typically we see in similar scenarios involving fiat currency, the deposits being made are occurring late at night and are on sporadic occasions. So the human trafficking subjects that we've been able to observe typically show that pattern for this type of criminal activity.
Okay, great. And I'm going to come back to something you mentioned there about notifying authorities, but let me just jump over to Janelle for a second. And Janelle, any patterns that you like to share, you're saying?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Bill, and thank you, Beth. I think just to add to what Beth said, everything she said, yeah, absolutely. And in addition to that, I mean, we have to know first if people are using crypto or purchasing crypto. So for financial institutions, it's really critical that they're using some kind of intelligence software which can identify those crypto-related transactions. So, for example, we can see the flow of funds move between from fiat from your financial institution, perhaps to a VASP, and vice versa, like centralized exchanges, peer-to-peer vendors, what Beth mentioned, Bitcoin ATMs, other wallets with integrated payment processors linked to bank accounts like MetaMask, and vice versa. Of course, we can see those funds being cashed out on the other side, making that crypto to fiat conversion, should those deposits be made via a Bitcoin ATM, which again is traceable on the blockchain. So I would just add that, you know, if you're looking at a particular person or subject of interest, that you will need to know if they're dealing in crypto. So whether that's as you go through their pockets, you find a Bitcoin ATM receipt, if you find a hard drive or USB drive that could be an indication a person is using crypto as well. And then, of course, when you go to their financial institution or whatever bank that they're banking at, that bank hopefully is using some intelligent software to identify the payment rails between a VAS and a financial institution. Great,
Janelle, and yeah, I think you hit on something there that I think Chris, you'll agree with me. Something that's so important to the investigator is we call pocket trash, right? We go through those little scraps of paper in their pockets, and sometimes we forget about that. Maybe we're lucky enough that somebody does throw it into an evidence bag, or sometimes just leaves it back there. But I'm sure, Chris, in your time, you've seen enough where you find the value in that pocket trash, right? Which is just maybe receipts or scraps of paper or notes.
Yeah, absolutely. And first, thank you for having me here and TRM taking part of this important discussion. I really appreciate it. And Beth and Janelle, it's great to see you both as well. And I think you're right. I think that those little things can really kind of blow open an investigation. I think for human trafficking, as you define it, it's the movement of people for exploitation. And focusing on those exploitation crimes, like Beth mentioned, are really where on-chain investigations can have the most value, is seeing where those crimes, the exploitation side of it, touch the on-chain, have the financial transactions, and touch the public more specifically. So talking about the things that you mentioned, like the child sexual abuse material, the sextortion, the prostitution, the smuggling, that's where you're going to see the most type of advertisements, like Beth mentioned, see the payments. And then from there, I would really approach it like you're saying, like any other type of investigation. So starting with the traditional techniques of looking through the pockets, having the frontline investigators asking the important questions about why people are conducting these transactions. You mentioned in my introductory statement about Welcome to Video is the darkness largest child exploitation website. And oftentimes we found that people were going to exchanges and creating a cryptocurrency account for the first time and only doing one payment. So they create an account, very soon fund it for the minimal amount that they needed to be able to send the payment to Welcome Video and sent it off. And I'm sure if they'd been approached and asked specific questions by the anti-money laundering people, they would have probably not had great answers for why they quickly needed to fund this account and send it to one payment. And oftentimes we saw they knew very little about cryptocurrency as well.
Great. Yeah, I think it was mentioned here a couple of times, and I just want to revisit this. Bitcoin ATMs. I think, Beth, you definitely brought that up, and it was mentioned here. It has come up in other cases here of the ATM machine. So where do you see in this human trafficking, where do you see the Bitcoin ATM? And maybe it's throughout it, but where do you see those possibilities that we can identify human trafficking patterns by looking at the Bitcoin ATM? I'll
yes.
to you, Beth. Yeah.
Yes, sure. So I'll take a stab at that. So on some of the aspects, like within mirroring up what is occurring in like the real life as what's occurring on the blockchain, it's dependent upon being able to leverage all of the intelligence that's around that. So like what Janelle had said, like being able to utilize software such as what we're all here for and representing, being able to use that for the front lines for the providers of those ATM machines. So some of the things and indicators that we see within that is that for the Bitcoin kiosks, if they have surveillance that is instilled within those machines, they're the first line of defense within human trafficking because they're actually being able to actually witness what's going on and the individuals that are making those payments to that. But then on the blockchain, without having that, it's almost as if we're blind on seeing what transpired in order for it to be on-ramped onto the blockchain. So once it's on the blockchain, it's very traceable. So we're able to then see the Bitcoin kiosks and then be able to see the transactions of where they actually transpired from there. But without having industry collaboration within that piece, we can't take the red flag indicators that a Bitcoin kiosk operator may actually observe, and then what we can tie into with the transactional behavior that we then observe on the blockchain. So it's really being able to have both of those insights in order to build out a proper topology on that.
Right. Yeah, and one of the things I've seen with, in particular with human trafficking, as far as where it's used, right? We talked about it's used to pay for ads, maybe used to pay for services, right? Another area that I've seen to look at is the actual victims who are being paid in cryptocurrency. Many of them, those victims come from foreign countries, and it becomes an easier way to get their funds, right, their money back to back home, wherever that may be, or to family members back home. Which, when I have that conversation with these types of groups, because today we're joined, I know in the audience, we're not only joined by law enforcement, but we're also joined by people in the industry of saving, of trying to rescue, and in the OSINT industry as well. So, one of the things I've looked at and said, hey, if you are talking to one of these victims and they are being paid in Bitcoin, let's see if we can get those addresses, right? We want to get those addresses because, like you said, Beth, we're all here joined to fight this crime, but we also offer these analytical programs and software that we have that tracks and traces cryptocurrency, blockchain transactions. And one of the things we've talked about constantly, right, in law enforcement, Chris, is we would want that address from that victim, be it who it may, because that will get us back to, hopefully, the command and control. And maybe, Chris, in your investigations, what is our ultimate goal, right? Is it to take off, arrest we'll say the John or the person? Is it to go after the victim, or is it really, which I always looked at with drug trafficking, right? We want to go after the head of the snake, right, Chris? And maybe you can talk about command and control and how we work our way back to that.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Bill. I think if you can start with the victim payment and look at the context of it, it's the victim, they're being paid, follow the money back, and who is controlling those funds. And if you can identify a real world person behind it, that's huge. You're kind of moving up the ladder, similar to many street investigations you would have conducted back at the DEA. And finding out who's in control of these organizations is critical to being able to dismantle them, of course. And you mentioned goals, and I think the goals can be not necessarily singular, but on multiple fronts. So it could just be trying to rescue people. It could be trying to seize assets to be able to dismantle it. Maybe the person operating this network is not even in the US. Maybe it's in an unfriendly country somewhere else in the world. But if you can take those assets and remove them from them, hopefully you can kind of make them irrelevant to it. There's also the potential of working with other partners to where you might be able to look at more of the infrastructure behind the thing. So can you take down some type of server that's hosting all these ads? Can you take down some type of encrypted messaging application that's being used to connect the clients and the people organizing it and the victims? And if any one of those things could happen, that could be considered a success. And then, of course, law enforcement looking for arrests and holding people accountable and ultimately seeing jail time is of huge importance as well.
Right. And Chris mentioned about, this is working our way up the chain. Would you agree that these are transnational criminal organizations that are involved in human trafficking, child sexual exploitation? And if so, if they are transnational, do we get support? Can we get support? Because I know today we are joined by not only your cat there, right? Is it your cat to join us? But we're also joined by people from all over the world, from law enforcement and other investigations, intelligence agencies. So just give us a little insight into transnational criminal organizations and, how do we work with them? How do we work with those countries, I should say?
Yeah, definitely. What Chris mentioned about all of those efforts, right, in order to track down, trace, map out this organization, or all of these organizations, rather, it's not only the trafficking in human beings that they're trafficking, could also be wildlife trafficking, drug trafficking, et cetera, right? So one naturally follows the other, I think, just as a matter of economics here. So it's really important then, in order to map out these organizations and seek justice either for victims or seize those funds, whatever the goal is, to have multilateral cooperation, cross-border cooperation with other jurisdictions, with other NGOs, like ATII, cooperation between intelligence firms like the four of us, for these matters. I think it's really critical. I think one area in particular where we can work together would be providing that training and that education to law enforcement. So similar to this webinar, but not only to law enforcement, I would also say to other government agencies and groups like the OSCE, the Organization for Security Cooperation in Europe. That's something that CipherTrace had an opportunity to do, was to present to all of the member states present at the Alliance Against Trafficking in Human Beings here just in this past April, and share with them a case study of a successful outcome and what that looked like. And ultimately, it boiled down to a partner law enforcement agency in another jurisdiction, working with a private company, working with other governments in order to track down this person who was actively trafficking in human beings, and ultimately rescue a child who had been trafficked.
Okay, great. No, that's really good to hear. I want to just move to another little topic here, kind of related, just to see what your experience is in this area of human trafficking. It's obfuscation techniques. I want to throw out to you there. Definitely, we see it in drug trafficking and ransomware. It's huge with the sanctioned countries that are involved in things like ransomware and their use of obfuscation techniques. In human trafficking, I'll throw it down to you, Beth. Just throw it over to you. As far as what would you like to point out, as far as maybe either a pattern or a technique or something that's used, maybe it's used by all criminals?
Yeah, so I would say that for obfuscation techniques, it's not a siloed thing where one particular criminal actor will use one method versus another. One of the things that is becoming more and more prevalent is what we call chain hopping. So going from one cryptocurrency into another. So if you have Bitcoin and then you move into another cryptocurrency like Ethereum, and then diversify that into different tokens that are riding on top of Ethereum. We see that as a tactic in order to move the funds very, very quickly in and out of different blockchains, which then makes it challenging to then actually trace the funds. But with wallet software that allows that to be integrated for individuals that are transacting, blockchain analytic company like Chainalysis does have the ability to see that cross-chain transfers that occur, which then allows us to actually follow the funds even further. However, it is challenging though when that diversification of assets is actually employed within this type of transactional behavior.
Okay, so that's good. Chain hopping is an area, something that we've been looking at closely, are the use of mixers, especially something like a Tornado Cash or recently a sanctioned Blender IO. Chris, are you seeing the use of mixers used in this type of criminal activity?
Yeah, absolutely. That is a common technique. I think you can imagine that if somebody's doing something illegal, they want to try as hard as they can to not connect that activity to themselves. And to lay a foundation a little bit for the listeners, if you took a public blockchain like Bitcoin, where every transaction that occurs, you could see, so if the address A sends to address B, 1 Bitcoin, you would see it. A mixer, however, would take kind of a pool. So if Janelle, myself, Beth all put in 1 Bitcoin into a pool, and that pool then sent 1 Bitcoin to Bill, you would be able to see that the Bitcoin went there, but you wouldn't necessarily know which one of the three of us were the ones sending it. And you can extrapolate that out to multiple different payments over different time periods using different cryptocurrencies like Beth mentioned, and having significantly more transactions out of that. So it is something that we definitely pay attention to and try and focus on. I think that's kind of key to why TRM focuses on the entire blockchain ecosystem. We're not a company built for one specific type of cryptocurrency. We look at the entire ecosystem at large. Beth mentioned the multiple different currencies. I think we covered 28 different blockchains. And, that's because the techniques are always evolving, that we're trying to evolve as well at the same time and be able to cover things like mixers, chain hopping, other types of obfuscation techniques.
Right. And then Janelle, when we talk about Bitcoin or we talk about cryptocurrency, or not us because we know differently, right? But when you hear about it in the media, you hear about it in public, about the anonymity, right? With the tools and the training, are we able to get past that anonymity on those transfers there? That was for Janelle.
Yeah, I'm muting. Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think that's still, at this point in time, I think education is key. But I think, there's really a lack of deep understanding of distributed ledger technology just across the board. And that includes governments, agencies, investigators, and criminals. So oftentimes, like Chris mentioned, mixers, you will see criminals dump a bunch, for example, like 20 Bitcoin into Wasabi CoinJoin. Now, if you read Wasabi documentation, Wasabi tells you actually never do this. Don't deposit more than 1 Bitcoin at a time or something like that. But how many of us actually go through, right, and read the directions? So I think in that case, it's that's completely traceable. That can be traced, right? A large deposit like that, especially if on the other side, I would expect to see them recombine those funds for around 20 Bitcoin, right? With maybe other outputs from other mixed cycles as well. So I think also that behavioral pattern, right? If someone isn't aware or didn't read the documentation of how to properly mix their funds, perhaps then they would also not know not to recombine their funds on the other side. So yeah, definitely pseudo-anonymous. There are dozens of ways that one can de-anonymize, right, themselves when using obfuscation techniques that both Beth and Chris mentioned. Beth talked about chain hopping. So yeah, when we're talking about bridging assets, right, from, more like bridging the value of assets over, for example, like Bitcoin, bridging that value over to Ethereum through the use of a tool like RenVM, right? That's completely traceable as well. So if you have knowledge of how to go through and read the smart contract, you can actually see where those funds go on the other side. So if I see, like, for example, an inspector, in CipherTrace Inspector, if I see funds go into RenVM, I can then go to the RenVM smart contract, read it, and know exactly which Ethereum address that that RenBTC was minted on. And then I can trace it from there on Ethereum. So chain hopping is used, yes, absolutely traceable with our tools and also open source tools as well. I want to mention that.
Right. No, it's a good point to raise the open source tools that are out there, to marry them up with these blockchain analytical tools as well. But you also mentioned the Wasabi. I think you mentioned it was out there. They have information out there, right, on what to do and not to do, which is kind of unique to this industry, right? We didn't see in drug trafficking. Drug traffickers kind of give up their their secrets, their state secrets there, but there's a lot out there on the internet, right, that's in the public domain that these companies or these mixers, coins, they share. And one of the things I always tell people to look at is go grab that white paper to anything, right? There's always going to be probably a white paper. Go read that first. There's probably a lot of answers in there on how it maybe a coin or a token works or what's expected of it. Before going on, and yeah, that even extends to some of these NFTs there. Let me just jump to what I wanted to ask about was some public-private partnerships. Okay, I mean that's why we're here today, right? To partner up. Not common to get the five of us in the same room together to have this discussion, but we're all committed to this problem and trying to figure out ways to combat it. So look, Beth, can you talk about some industry collaboration? In particular, what are we looking for to identify and disrupt, dismantle, destroy these transnational criminal organizations? Earlier you mentioned, I really think it's an important point to hit home on, is notifying, because we're talking to today a number of people from the private sector, from the financial sector here. What is law enforcement looking for? And how to get it to them? I'll leave it to you to describe that. What is it that they can help with when they're filing, I guess, suspicious activity reports, suspicious transaction reports, things like that?
Yeah, so within this space, collaboration is crucial because what the blockchain is being able to do is only a snapshot. And within an investigation, it's a multitude of things that are coming together in order to actually make the case. And so being able to be part of working groups or part of organizations that allow, like ATII, that bring in the collaboration from all industry. So you have your blockchain analytics, you have your OSINT, you have financial industry, and then you also have social media platforms, and then also all of the law enforcement that then contribute. So all of those pieces build into and build in the investigation. So one of the things that Chainalysis is a contributing member to is the International Center of Missing and Exploited Children. And we're part of the cryptocurrency working group. And one of the amazing things about this working group is that we meet with a bunch of individuals from blockchain analytics firms. TRM is also part of it, cryptocurrency exchanges, social media platform, law enforcement, and financial institutions. And we come together so that we can discuss like the best practices, different points of context within the industry, so that one, law enforcement has like a reference guide of where they can get the information quickly, because especially within this type of crime, there are victims that are being victimized all the time, and being able to be at the forefront of that and have point of contact in order to get this and get it off of the radar is really, really crucial. And so being able to meet to discuss what those red flag indicators are will enhance the ability for any of the suspicious activity to actually be reported, and be reported in a form that allows really quick action to actually take place. So being able to do this provides an avenue so that there's greater awareness. So to Janelle's point of being able to train individuals and have awareness of what's actually going on in this space, but then also being able to help individuals, like when Chris was at the IRS, being able to have like that pocket of individuals that can actually come together to combat the human trafficking and child exploitation that occurs.
Janelle, do you see any kind of key words or anything that our financial partners out there who are watching today should either be looking for or putting into their reports when they are, and maybe their best way to communicate it to law enforcement? Yes, they file SARS. Have you seen other ways that maybe that communication kind of works for them to get that message across? Hey, we see something here.
Yes, definitely. That, the SARS data, yeah, definitely useful, not always used. We all know that. There's just so much of it and more each year, especially this year. I don't have the numbers for how much it increased this year with respect to cryptocurrency related SARS, but it was significant. So I think it's important, like what Beth mentioned, to have those working groups that involve all of the pillars within financial crimes. And that includes private companies like ours to help guide, to educate, to train, and also to support those investigations. Again, I think, there was a 2018 report done by, I think, the Ministry of Justice in Finland that talked about special victim assistance. So essentially, if a person is trafficked, they have access to the special victim assistance. And Finland did sort of research on this to find out how useful it was, the special victim assistance, and when it ended and what the outcomes were. And ultimately, they found that that data showed that the right to special assistance actually ended if investigations bring no charges or a verdict. And the biggest reason for that would be the lack of evidence. So that's a massive opportunity for blockchain analytics providers like ours to step in and help provide that evidence. Now, Beth mentioned that, there's more of a constellation of factors that are absolutely required. Blockchain analytics is one of them. But I think in terms of, for financial institutions, it's actually really knowing if your customers are dealing in cryptocurrency. And in order to do that, you must have that intelligence software. So I guess, yeah, that's how I think of it. Definitely those working groups whether that's formal or informal. But I think it's quite difficult to just go through all of that SARS data. I don't think that currently we have a great system in order to obtain those key factors contained within the SARS data that we need to focus on these types of crimes.
Yeah, I would echo the SARS data. I always try to make it a point if I'm out there. The blockchain intelligence group, we talk to financial institutions, especially a lot of these institutions that are involved in high risk banking, other high risk type banking, and they're taking on crypto. And when we have this conversation about SARS, and I know we have some folks in the audience today who are the BSA officers, right? They're the SAR writers, the investigators, and they don't get feedback. I know it was the biggest complaint, even as agent when I was out there talking to the banks. But I definitely want to reassure them that SARs are getting read. They sometimes it may not be for a year, but I tell you, those SARs become really important. Maybe 6 months later, maybe a year later. That I've always found, right? So. And it's unfortunate that there isn't that mechanism sometimes to get back to that person, because some of these investigations, I think, Chris and Beth, who work these large financial investigations, they take 2-3 years sometimes to make. Then maybe that person's gone or they're onto other things as well, right? But I just try to make that point home to anybody that's with us today. Keep filing those good SARs. They do get looked at. They do become important. And Chris, something I want to throw out just because you recently retired from the from the IRS. When I was an agent, I'd be out there talking to the financial institutions in the New York area, and so would the FBI and IRS and HSI. That was the traditional financial institutions. Do you feel, or have you seen, the current crypto institutions, exchanges, the VASPs, are they taking advantage of those resources at the federal level, even the state level, and reaching out and saying, hey, come in, talk to us. We want to hear what you're seeing. We want to kind of show you what we're seeing here in some sort of big macro level. Have you experienced that, Chris?
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. You're spot on. The public-private partnerships really are crucial in my experience as an agent. That was really what made it successful. So whether that's a private firm filing the suspicious activity report, like you mentioned, or if it's like a crypto company that's able to help, like TRM, Chainalysis, CipherTrace. I know listening to this webinar probably could sound daunting if somebody didn't know a lot about cryptocurrency. They're hearing about wrapped Ethereum, they're hearing about mixers or chain hopping, and they're just thinking like, what is all this craziness going on? And, maybe that's intimidating, but I'm fortunate enough to lead a team of former law enforcement investigators, and I would be happy to field someone's phone call if they are stuck and they don't know where they're going and they want help. I know Beth and Janelle's teams would surely help as well. So I think it's not only just knowing about something, but it's also knowing somebody. And I think that's what the value of these outreach opportunities provides. And so if somebody had a question, wanted to reach out and didn't understand it, wanted us to kind of translate and say, this is where I think you should go, we're more than happy to help be able to do that. There's nothing my team would love more than to help put points on the board. And I'm sure everybody else agrees. And, what better way to help somebody than when they're actually real victims involved, like in human trafficking.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I'll reiterate it again. I believe all of us, if you need to reach out to any of us, I think we're all on LinkedIn, so you can find us there. It's a real easy way to get in touch with any of us. And which leads me kind of into a segue here. I'm going to try doing this without becoming a commercial for any one tool. Okay, if you'd help me out with that. But we did talk about tools. We talked about our companies here. So I'll go around the room and ask, something how to leverage these analytical tools for what our friends out there are doing in the financial institution. Maybe you want to address even financial institutions that may think they're not in crypto, because I think we all believe that if you're a financial institution, you're probably in crypto in some way. But let's just talk about those analytical tools more in a general sense of how to leverage them. And Janelle, maybe I'll throw it over to you first.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Bill. I would say all of our tools do something different. They're not all the same. So in terms of tracing UTXO-based cryptocurrencies, I would say really you need the right tool for the right job. whether that's if you're looking for intelligence or relationships, sort of that like 10,000 foot view between entities, or if you're looking for something more diagnostic. So if you're actually tracing for diagnostics, you really need that level of detail on the UTXO, the particular UTXO, and its cluster that was used in those transactions. So not generalist, but specific. And those UTXO-based tracing tools like CipherTrace's Inspector, they're the most true to the blockchain transactions. I would say with respect to DeFi tracing, Beth mentioned that when we were discussing bridging assets, that honestly, from what I've seen, no one tool does it all. Those innovations occur rapidly. New chains are being created. There are new projects, new bridges, new parachains, all of that. So I encourage investigators to use those open source tools for what's on the market now. And if you're not sure of what those tools are, definitely come to a training or hit me up via email or LinkedIn. I can definitely talk you through that and show you what I'm talking about there. Now, with respect to financial institutions and knowing whether or not their clients are dealing in crypto, like you mentioned, Bill, the answer is yes, your clients are dealing in crypto, whether you know it or not. And so in order to have that information that you need to have that intelligence software I mentioned a couple of times before. CipherTrace Armada provides that information. So we have details on all of the payment rails that you can just incorporate that intelligence within your transaction monitoring and know where your clients are sending funds to and how often, whether that's a VASP or a peer-to-peer vendor.
Okay. And Beth, as far as the tools, you working this, because I got to see you do that on the law enforcement side, right? And now it's much better than just a few years ago, right? When I first started out and watching you give presentations there. Just speaking in terms of law enforcement and, to the value to them and where it's needed. And, is this training still something that's just needed, especially like at the federal level, the large agencies? Is it still specialized? Is it something that's still specialized?
Yeah, so that's, I think, one of the beauties with being part of an analytics blockchain company is that within the awareness is always going to be needed, which is training. And so it doesn't matter if you're state, local, if you're federal, there's always going to need to be training because not only does the industry evolve, but so do the criminals. And so being able to have effective training for law enforcement as well as for compliance, to be able to understand what you're actually seeing on the blockchain is crucial. And so when I was at DEA, one of the biggest things was just being able to identify what a cryptocurrency address looked like, and then what are you trying to get out of? So like, what are the goals of like that investigation and how do you apply it within that? And so being able to leverage a tool such as Chainalysis Reactor, which is our investigative tool, allows you to actually give an insight into the transactions that are occurring on the blockchain. And we have a phenomenal training program that then allows individuals to not only understand what's going on the blockchain, but then how to apply it to your investigation so that you can actually understand how to follow the funds, how to send legal process, when to send legal process, and how that is then managed within the investigation as a whole.
Great. Yeah, and the training definitely is ongoing, something evolving. I think we all kind of offer either some sort of a training on a tool or maybe some external type training just in blockchain cryptocurrency. We have that at Blockchain Intelligence Group, which I found looking at different trainings. I said, well, I think one of the leg ups or one of the advantages to those that participate in the training, in particular from one of the analytics companies, is more of a hands-on opportunity than to actually see it and feel it by getting on there and tracking and tracing cryptocurrencies. We have Chris is going back again to this law enforcement question as public-private partnership and with the institutions here. IRS obviously, and Treasury saw a lot of the SARS. Maybe you could speak to something where maybe how do these companies improve? We always talk about improvement of SARs. Maybe there's something you've seen there versus a really good crypto SAR versus, man, I wish I had some more information in this SAR. Can you kind of just talk us through? I know we had that when we talked about regular, financial SARs. When we got SARs, what kind of data, what kind of information would you like to see in those SARs as that criminal investigator?
I think that the SARs kind of serve two different purposes. So you have the initial kind of purpose of so-and-so is doing this illegal activity and summarize it and try and be descriptive as possible. Always love to see some type of attachments or the underlying data behind it that can really kind of help emphasize the picture that was trying to be painted in the narrative. And so that could be something that a case is spun up on solely based upon that suspicious activity report. The other way, like you mentioned, years down the road, that maybe there's a value is that an investigator is looking at so-and-so with whatever email address, this like unique moniker. And similar to like on the blockchain where a transaction is there forever. And if somebody makes a mistake, they can't go back and erase it. The suspicious activity reports are similar in that maybe 4 years ago, somebody did something goofy at PayPal that caused a suspicious activity report to be filed. But in that narrative that's completely unrelated is that same moniker that's being used on a darknet market or on a forum or somewhere else. And now you have this bridge to be able to that covers the gap between the darknet and the real world and touching on a real person. And that just can blow the case wide open, of course. And, I kind of point that like once Walter White's operating a car wash, it's really hard to conceal that the person is laundering funds through something once you be able to connect it to a real world identity. And so much like it was mentioned previously for training, TRM are really focused on building a financial networks for people, for safety for billions of people. And one of the ways we do that is by training through TRM Academy, but also recently we partnered with other leading firms to launch chainabuse.com. And that's a place where people can go and submit information behind schemes with cryptocurrency addresses. And then analytic firms like us, and then also exchanges, use that information to be able to educate themselves and hopefully file better suspicious activity reports. And people can go to chainabuse.com and read the reports themselves. They can also upvote or downvote so that the best information is being readily available to everybody as well.
Great. Yeah, and we talked about SARs here, just and to kind of wrap the SARs issue up. For those that are in the crypto industry and new to it, SARs. What we've seen, or what I've definitely witnessed over time, when some of the regulators come down with their fines and their penalties, right? A lot of it has to go back to lack of training because the SARs just weren't thorough, or maybe they weren't even there. So can't impress upon you enough, if you are in the industry, the crypto industry, it's new, and you haven't done the training on the AML side, and I think that's a whole nother area that we'll definitely have to look at. Look at the trainings that are offered that are out there for you, because as you see, I think all of the big fines, it really came down to some training issues. I'm not sure if we just lost Beth, but I'll continue on here. Look, I want to say it's been a pleasure and an honor for me to be able to moderate this panel between Beth Bisbee from Chain Analysis, Janelle Still from Cypher, Chris Januszewski from TRM Labs. If you'd like to get in touch with any of us, like I said before, we're all on LinkedIn, or shoot a message through this through the Discord channel. I know that they're using for the ATII, and we'll definitely be in touch with you there. On behalf of the panel, I'd also want to recognize the ATII for their efforts to combat human trafficking and bring together this audience committed to ending human trafficking. We're fortunate to have a cross-section of audience members, from law enforcement to the financial sector to independent investigators looking to contribute to these anti-human trafficking efforts. So with that, I'll try to wrap things up here in the time we have. I'd like to ask each of the panelists to provide one action item. What is it that you want to leave with relating to cryptocurrency investigations, compliance, or awareness when it comes to human trafficking? So Janelle, I'll throw that over to you first.
Yeah, thank you, Bill. I'd like to say that, or just remind everyone, if you're not aware, that 1/3 of all trafficking and human beings victims are children. So if you're a nonprofit, if you're an NGO, who assists IDPs or refugees in conflict zones, and you're collecting data in their personal information, right? Their PII, that it's absolutely critical that you have good cybersecurity hygiene in order to protect traffickers, transnational organizations, criminal organizations from obtaining that data. And I guess we recognize that sometimes putting the pressure on the end user can be burdensome, but organizations can partner with cyber firms and analytics firms in order to protect that data as is needed. And I would say this applies to anyone with access to any IDP or refugee data.
Okay, great, Janelle, and thank you. Thank you for being here with us today. Chris, any parting words here you'd like to share with the audience?
Yeah, I would just encourage everybody to try and build up their network so that way when they have an issue, they're able to reach out and have those conversations with other people to kind of help educate them through it. I would also encourage people to educate themselves online as well, as whether that's going to some place like NCMEC, the National Center for Missing Exploited Children, Europol, or even to chainabuse.com. I looked recently and there were over 20 different reports for sextortion, and that's a growing trend and something that I know for many parents would want to read about and be able to educate them so that, God forbid, they can help prevent anybody they know become falling victim to it as well.
Okay, great. Thank you, Chris. Thanks for being here and for you being here. And I see, Beth, you are back with us there. I'm not sure what happened, but you're back. We're just kind of wrapping things up with leaving the audience members with some sort of advice or tip or some parting words. So I'll turn over to you.
Yeah, no, I apologize. Welcome to the world of being virtual, right? So just to reiterate and recap what we've talked about already, but being able to actually leverage all of the intelligence that's out there in order to fight this horrific crime is one of the things that the analytics companies are here to actually work together and collaborate with in order to actually make this something that can be done and can be attainable and not as daunting as what it may be. As what Chris indicated earlier of this may sound very daunting just by all of the different terminology that may be going on out there. There are firms out there that are willing to be able to actually help and assist to make this not so foreign to so many people within this space. And especially when it comes to saving victims within human trafficking, we're here to be able to help that in a way that provides that bridge between public and private partnerships in order to actually be effective within this.
Great. No, thank you guys. Thanks for those words there. And yeah, I think hopefully after this, almost hour, 45 minute to hour session here that we were talking about these issues, I'm hoping that we've left each of you in the audience with some sort of action item from the beginning of this. If it's just from, hey, if you're in law enforcement, let's collect all that pocket trash. So let's make sure that we go through it. To, if you're in the industry, if you're in a cryptocurrency exchange or a bank that may or may not, where you're thinking that you're into cryptocurrency, that you're starting to look at some of these tools that each of us provide in the analytics and risk assessment and analysis of the blockchain. That we left you with that. And if you're an open source, that now you see that there's other opportunities for training how to bring open source and blockchain material together. Would I tell everybody, in something like this kind of crime, we want to collect as much data, right? And if it's, getting the right time or the right person to talk to the victim, not everybody, and the victim may not want to talk to law enforcement right away, but may talk to a social worker, or may talk to somebody else who is also victimized, but we want to keep in the back of our mind, okay, what is the financial infrastructure? Is it all cash, or as we're seeing now with human trafficking, is a lot of it being done in crypto, and how do we exploit that? Well, the way to exploit that is to know what questions to ask, is to know what's out there and what you can do. So, like I said, even right down to the victim, Can you provide us with information to their financial infrastructure so that we can work our way back, or law enforcement, that is, can work their way back to the command and control with that. Again, Janelle and Chris and Beth, thank you for participating in this important webinar and this important discussion. Again, to the ATII, thank you for recognizing the need to have and bring together some of the analytics companies to discuss these issues as well. With that being said, my name again is Bill Callahan from Blockchain Intelligence Group. I'd like to thank everybody for attending. Please enjoy the remainder of this these 2 days of educational opportunities, and good luck, and thank you for what you're doing.